state immediately undertook sterilization programs. They were focused immediately on the mentally ill, the so-called mentally ill, and the mentally handicapped. That was what they referred to as their T4 program, which was in the early 1930s and which was horrifically vicious. And all these psychiatrists and eugenicists that implemented that specific program then went to go start up all the concentration camps. And if you look at, the Nazi ideology came from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes, where they predated the Nazi state.
And were they not funded by Rockefeller in part?
They were indeed, and they were these sort of scientific and psychiatric institutes of biology and all these different avenues, pseudo-scientific avenues, I should say. And the Rockefeller Foundation indeed did fund a lot of the early experiments in Nazi psychiatry and in Nazi science, and then in fact the Nazi doctors, the infamous Joseph Mengele, who was the head doctor at Auschwitz, conducting perhaps the most horrific human experiments ever conducted in history. He got funding from the Rockefeller Foundation for quite a while. And of course, the Rockefeller Foundation was one of the premier financiers of eugenics within the United States, and also in exporting it not just to Germany, but in Britain. Initially, eugenics had been sort of exported from Britain to the United States, but its development and institutionalization in the United States was far more advanced. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was a very well-oiled machine, and it went into every aspect of society. And the foundations, speaking of institutions, major philanthropic foundations, the Carnegie Corporation, Rockefeller Foundation, they emerged in the early 20th century also to act sort of as engines of social engineering based upon the principle of engineering consent. So they're focused on also building consensus among the elite and engineering consent among the governed. So the foundations funded the creation of all the think tanks. If you look at Council on Foreign Relations, its initial budget was all coming from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation. And they funded and still continue to fund major projects of the Council on Foreign Relations. They also invested a lot of money into the origins of the Bilderberg Group in post-World War II, so 1954 was the first meeting. They were also very much involved in funding the origins of the Trilateral Commission because they have an interest as social engineers in establishing consensus among the elite. So they throw their money in those organizations. And, of course, the foundation executives and board members are all members of these think tanks as well, so that they can ensure that these ideas are really infused within the institutional structure. And this, of course, expands outwards through the society.
Excellent, Andrew. Now I want to start wrapping up our discussion here. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been very informative. It's important to note that even today you can look at Rockefeller University research projects, and they are following a Skinneristic, behavioristic paradigm. And even today you can see that taking place. Now, it's been said that the Bilderberg Group in particular is one of the most influential, the most influential network of all time. Zbigniew Brzezinski said, I believe, probably in his book Between Two Ages in the 70s, that soon the world would essentially be run by a group of elites who have traditions and morals above and beyond the purview of the rest of the population. So what does this imply for the future of Canada and the United States in particular, and really all the nations of the world?
Well, it's Brzezinski wrote that book in 1970, and that was the book that actually led to the creation of the Trilateral Commission, as he advocated a community of developed nations. And David Rockefeller read that and really liked the idea, so made it happen. And indeed, the idea of being run by a technocratic elite, or what President Eisenhower referred to in his farewell address in 1961. He didn't just warn about a military-industrial complex. If you go to the presidential library online and read his speech, you'll actually read that he also warned about another interesting development, which is that society may be taken over by a scientific technological elite. And so indeed there are a number of warnings and even advocacy for such. I would argue that Brzezinski was a bit of an advocate for it, since he is among the most premier of the intellectual elite in the United States. So the idea that we are headed that direction is almost, it's a little late. We're already in an intellectually elite-managed society. So what does it mean for the future progression of our society? Well, it's very simple. All you have to do is really go to studying the ideas, the ideologies of these individuals, of these elites. See what they talk about in their internal documents, which are generally mostly publicly available. It's not conspiratorial. If all of this is documented, you can find it and read it in their own words, because this is the direction they're steering society. If you want to know what it means for the future, read what they're saying now and what they've been saying in the past. Because as you see how they've shaped society up to the present point, then you can see how they're currently reshaping it, what direction they're taking it in, and for what purpose. And it's not, you don't have to look at it as a conspiracy, because you just look at it as a social process. Because there's another important point about not looking at this thing in terms of a conspiracy theory, because conspiracy theory leaves really no hope. It's a small group of people colluding everything in dark, and nobody can do anything about it. They control everything. Well, that's not true. I mean, even if you just read all the available documents, you can see that they have to respond to changes and different resistances and rebellions that are taking place from the ground up. I mean, they didn't plan for the civil rights movement, but they reacted to it, and the foundations infused it with money in the hopes of co-opting it. And so they have to react. They're very pragmatic. They're ideological, but they have to deal with reality. So if you look just factually at the progression of this intellectual elite, you can see that there is hope, because there's a lot of weakness, there's a lot of open areas for people to move in and start changing these things, and start moving society into a free and open society where we don't even need an elite, let alone an intellectual elite or a financial elite. And the key to understanding those openings is, first of all, to understanding the systems and the ideas and institutions of power that dominate us. To understand, first of all, that we are being dominated, which is a very important point, because most people just don't even understand that. Mm-hmm. Most people think we are free, democratic, and imbued with beautiful liberty in our society, and this represents itself in the fact that I can go and shop every day of the week. My credit card debt may be expensive, but at least I can buy useless things that I will never need, because isn't freedom wonderful? And until we understand the state of our domination and literally the structure and the ideas and institutions of our society, then we can't hope to change them. But once we understand that, we can really start moving forward. And it's not far off or utopian to imagine that we can actually create a society without elites. But first we have to just understand the nature of our society as it exists, and then we can move forward.
Excellent, Andrew. Well, thank you so much for joining us. You can read Andrew's work at andrewgavinmarshall.com and also thepeoplesbookproject.com. He has a number of books published as well, Andrew. Do you want to mention?
Well, I'm working on a multi-volume series of books at the moment. They're not published yet, but that's what the thepeoplesbookproject.com is, raising support for those books on the history of ideas and institutions of power.
Excellent, Andrew. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope we can speak again soon. Again, this was Liberty Coin and Precious Metals Radio with our guest, Andrew Gavin Marshall. He can be reached at andrewgavinmarshall.com or thepeoplesbookproject.com. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you very much.